Well, we are okay, Alenka. So, if you're okay, we can begin.
Yes, I'm fine. And again, thank you very much for it's real honor and pleasure to be here today to discuss these things with all of you.
Well, as an introduction, maybe, what does the category of perversion help us to think on a social and perhaps a socio-economical level?
Yeah, I think that first it is quite important to understand or accept this move that I'm making, which is to use perversion also not only as a clinical category, I mean, but even as a clinical category, as a concept that actually can be, in a way, applied to the functioning of the social. And in a way, this is already how Freud proceeded. For him, it was not only this or that, whatever neurotics that was on the couch or pervert, but in a way, always the society itself. So the link between the, let's say, individual and the social was there at the very outset of the Freudian discovery. And the next step is to actually know what we are talking about when we speak about perversion, because, you know, very often perversion is just kind of imaginary, I don't know, somebody with his saliva dropping out, observing some naked people and saying, oh, this is a pervert. The concept of perversion in psychoanalysis is a very different and precise one. So, and one of the interesting traits, features of perversion is precisely that differently from this kind of usual neurotic behavior, it seems to, there seems to be no true repression. Everything is out on the open. People are supposed to be in the know of everything, masters of something, and have little problems with whatever their existence. So this was also a proverbial Freudian estimation already, that actually perverts are very hard to analyze because they don't perceive anything about themselves as a problem. There is nothing really nagging at them, making all these symptoms and so on. Now, to make a jump, one of the theses that I'm making, and this is more speculative, perhaps more difficult to grasp at first, is that actually perversion is not simply without repression or outside repression, but that it is more something like a repression of the repression itself, of the mechanism of repression itself, of the site where repression is taking care. This is why it makes the repressed or the more inaccessible, even though it seems that it is still here, that it's not really repressed. And this I will also explain more, but this is precisely what I see in a way, as the direction into which many of our social phenomena and our reactions to them are being articulated lately. And one of the things that I particularly approach through this notion of disavowal, Freudian term is Verleugnung, like fetishist disavowal, is precisely the structure where I operate with full knowledge of something and yet still continue with practice, with my habits, that this knowledge should prevent from taking place. And the formula of this, as you probably well know, is this famous formulated by Octave Manoni, je sais bien, mais quand même. I know very well that this is also and so, but still I go on as before. The very last idea, that this kind of situation where we know all of this is what Octave Manoni formulated with the formula, je sais bien, mais quand même, I know very well, but all the same, I go on as if I didn't know it. And of course, this goes back to the Freudian theory of disavowal of castration, which I expand beyond this notion. But the idea there is, for instance, that fetishist disavowal, like fetishist of a shoe or something like this. For Freud, this was precisely this object kind of incarnated my unconscious belief, in the sense that it seems to suggest, I know very well that, for instance, women do not have a penis, but yet, because I hold on this object, I can still pretend that they have, that it is there, that it is not lacking or so. But precisely, I mean, in this essay, I go out of this narrow template of disavowal as disavowal of castration, which I think it's still pertinent, but I try to see how this is also modified and changed in this society. But basically, the idea is precisely that if we normal neurotics have all kinds of problems with this slack, with this perversion is precisely attempt at something that hides nothing, that represses nothing, that knows everything about everything that is to know. So this is this I can go on developing this in relationship to disavowal. This is a question for Bernardo, actually, or I can also bring in another register of social perversion, which I think is related to the question of desire and enjoyment. But you have to direct me here. What is first? What you would like to explore first?
Maybe you can go on in this direction of desire and social.
Of desire and yeah. No, because this for me is another social form in which we can see the kind of prevalence of perversion in our contemporary society, which is that the desire is really seen as something ultimately bad, because it depends or insists on a certain lack. Desire always is in this movement of saying that is not it. There is something lacking here. Let's put it this way. And from the Lacanian perspective, this is because this is the very structure of desire. Desire emerges precisely as the difference between, let's say, what you ask for and what you get. So it is not simply that desire is never satisfied because it is so picky, but the very structure of desire testifies to a certain gap, to a certain difference between, let's say, the demand articulated in speech and any object that comes to supposedly respond to this demand. So very quickly put, for me, perversion comes to town, so to say, and proposes enjoyment, jouissance, as the ultimate object of our desire. I think this is a very, very tricky move because it kind of suggests, even in this kind of, liberal society that we live in, that actually what desire deep down wants is simply to enjoy, and that enjoyment is the object of desire. And this, I think, is a really perverse move, because desire is desire precisely because it has no object in this sense. And perversion in this respect is precisely a kind of defense against desire in its radical aspect. So, and I think, again, this is one of the manifestations in which we are being caught more and more into a kind of society that that advances by flagging knowledge of this and that, but where this knowledge itself about our enjoyment, about what we really want, and so on, this knowledge itself is a kind of symptom or a kind of stand-in, a screen that screens off a certain fundamental impasse, contradiction, lack. So I don't know if you have any more specific questions here, because I'm doing this in a very
yeah, of course.
But,
I was recalling that you have a very beautiful example with a Lynchian film about that.
This precisely, if you remember this quite famous scene with the so-called Robbie Peru, I think it's his character's name in William Defoe is the actor in Wild at Heart. So anyway, the scene which if you've seen the movie, you surely remember it. It is this kind of obscene, perverse character enters the apartment of Laura Dern, the actress. I mean, I forgot her name in the movie anyway, and he actually kind of sexually assaults her, or tries to sexually assault her. She resists, and then there is this very strange moment where he actually manages to kind of arouse her. And at that point, he kind of exciting her, or he tries to make her say, fuck me. And till a certain moment when she actually does this, says this, and then he completely quits this whatever desire game that he's seen, and said, okay, some other time perhaps I have to go now. And there's this really terrible moment. And I think this is, I mean, I know it could also be seen particularly these days as a very politically not correct scene, but I think it is very correct precisely because it depicts the core of this perverse abuse. Because I think what comes across very nicely in this scene is his maneuver, where he wants precisely do this, namely make her trade her desire that makes her a subject for a certain piece of enjoyment. And I think the completely erroneous, wrong reading of this scene would be to say, okay, but we can see that deep down she nevertheless wanted him to fuck her, so she then broke down and the truth of her desire came up, and then he walks away almost like, some kind of analyst. But I really don't think this is the right reading. So I think what is really traumatic in this scene is precisely how he kind of sadistically forces her to kind of precisely trade her desire for this excitement that he's trying to provoke in her, and literally kind of stuck it down her throat in exchange. So how he really kind of not only reveals her deep desire, but reveals the traumatic point where she remains precisely without the desire that defines her. And then I actually take this scene to be also perhaps emblematic of how our so-called consumerism works, and to see that I don't know, all these different objects of consumption that are of desire that are being proposed to us, this little object of enjoyment that we are actually supposed to desire, how they are very often offered to us already with this kind of rejection built into them, namely that these objects say to us precisely what this male character says to Laura Dern, namely, once you buy them, once you have them, once you want to have this satisfaction, they say, okay, some other times, perhaps now I have to go, the satisfaction. So it's not only, as we often hear, that consumption functions on the presupposition of our desire, and that we get the object of desire even before we can desire them, which is true. But there is also this additional perverse twist where even when we are buying something, purchasing this, we already know it won't satisfy our desire in this way, but nevertheless, we kind of need to do it anyway. So we know well, but nevertheless, we do it. Yeah, so I don't know, I can go into many other things, which sorry, please, Bernard.
It's okay, it's okay. Maybe one a little bit more specific. You point out that knowledge in our time operates a kind of folding over itself. Could you explain to us how you understand this operation? Maybe with the Slavic example, we can say the hamsterization of knowledge, you know? And what is the relationship with the becoming fetish of knowledge in our time?
Okay, just a question. Should I explain Slavoj's example, or people are familiar with it? I mean, if I use it.
I think the majority of them, yes, are familiar with the hamster.
Familiar with the hamster. Okay. So there is this first level of, let's say, disavowal, which works like this. I say, I know well about something, and then I still go on as if I didn't. I acknowledge things. I am completely rational, but there is something about my practice that doesn't demonstrate this. This is the first level. And so Slavoj's hamster example points out precisely how whenever we hear this, somebody saying, oh, I know well, I can take reality exactly as it is, I don't need to repress anything, we should always ask, yeah, of course, but where is your hamster? So what is precisely the thing that you are hanging on in order to supposedly take everything, understand everything precisely as it is in reality? So, and which also means, like, socially critically, that we should always be very wary of people telling us, just cynicists saying, okay, but you know, we know everything, we know we are all corrupt, we know that everything is just a dirty game, you know. We should always be kind of skeptical about, do we really know in this sense, or is it something else going on here, some hamster hidden somewhere in the so now to finally start to answer your question, the term that I perceive, or the additional twist on this situation that I perceive, is the following. Namely, just think about how extremely important it is these days in all kinds of situations that we flag out, declare, and say that we know something, that we know, that we are aware, so that we are nobody's fools, that we are not naive, this kind of extreme fear to be exposed as naive. So we use our not only knowledge, but we use the declaration, the flag of this knowledge all the time, also in kind of conflicts, also like whatever disputes between left and right, we have to flag, yeah, but we know very well this, we know we are nobody's dukes, and so on. So what I then detect is precisely that what happens here is that this knowledge itself, that the structure, I know well, but all the same, permutates, shifts into something like, I know well, and this is precisely why I can go on like before. So it's no longer an opposition, but the knowledge itself kind of becomes the fetish that allows me to not know what I know. So because, and one example is, for instance, our relationship to the climate change. If we leave out now the direct denial, which is no longer so common, but it exists, the more frequent response is precisely this kind of disavowal. I will explain. So in this sense that we say, okay, of course, we know there is climate change, there is all this, and there is a whole jargon that is emerging out of this green transition, sustainability, this, that. There is a lot of commotion around it, and we flag out precisely, we are very aware that we are in this problem, that we have this problem. But then in a next step, this declaration of our awareness, of our knowledge about it, precisely becomes the hamster that makes it possible for us to still continue with the same kind of practice and economy that we are in and that brought us to this state. And I think this is true for also very different kinds of social crises, which we have plenty at this point, from this kind of political, geopolitical crises, illnesses like from COVID to whatever, so that there is more and more this kind of strange response where there is lots of commotion, lots of outrageous and very, very lousy response, but which in a sense serves no other purpose than the purpose of a hamster that kind of makes it possible for everything to remain or to go on in the same way.
Mm-hmm. Maybe yes. I can make a little bit of a brief commentary, because when I read your text, I recall Marx Fisher capitalist realism, because he has in some part a thinking of the bureaucracy of capitalism, and then he says that in some moment the works stop to be the goals of the works, stop to be like changing something in reality, but the measure of the very work in itself. So there you have in a kind of a different way, but you have this knowledge in a self-relation with itself, measuring measures, something like that.
Absolutely. No, this is exactly what I'm trying to also, in my way, define or articulate with this notion also of disavowal. For instance, you have now very often when there is some issue, some conflict that divides the public, or let's say the leftist and the rightist, most of the time what you see in these discussions, these vivid discussions, is not a response to that to this crisis, but just an attempt from both sides to signal to their own followers that they are in the right camp. And this is really also the kind of perverse social game that we are into. It's not anymore about the real issue, to put it naively, but about what is I'm supposed to say, what words to use in order to demonstrate that I am either the right leftist or the right rightist or whatever, the right woman or the not woman. And this is really strange in the way that this is functioning now.
Maybe the next question. Okay. Lacan understands truth as structured as a fiction. In your case, you link. I'm sorry. I want to say one before. Assuming that disavowal is in relationship with the of dependence on the university discourse formulated by Lacan, which traps us in a kind of a hell of continuous improvement. Do you see the possibility of a different outlet, way out for knowledge in our time, considering Lacan's other discourses?
Thanks a lot for this question. To answer very, very quickly, I think what is lost in this perverse configuration that I was describing is precisely what Lacan calls knowledge as truth, or truth as knowledge. because truth as knowledge or knowledge as truth means precisely that this knowledge touches or has at its integral part a certain real. And this is precisely what is lacking in this, whatever, call it university discourse or this kind of general fetishization of knowledge in the sense of using it for all other means, but for kind of formulating, understanding a certain real. So it is not at all that I'm trying to make a case against knowledge or this notion as such. This is not my point, and to embrace some kind of whatever obscurantist discourse it is about. It is simply that I claim that knowledge itself becomes completely derealized within this discourse. And perhaps one of the symptoms of this derealization of knowledge is also that nowadays it is almost impossible to distinguish between knowledge and information, because information is something very different and it has almost nothing to do with knowledge, and it's more, let's say, strong meaning of the term, which can absolutely be, let's say, revolutionary. This was Lacan's idea also. But knowledge in its dimension of truth always implies also a subjectivity. This does not mean that it is subjective, that knowledge as truth is subjective, but it means that there is precisely the place, the space of this negativity that is intrinsic part of knowledge as truth, and subject is the very concept of this negativity, of this gap. Does this answer a little bit this question of knowledge, or you want to?
Yeah. No, it's very well. And now I want to make you the truth question.
Truth question.
The question for the truth. Lacan understands truth as structured as a fiction. No? In your case, you link its emergence, the emergence of truth, to fiction in fiction, as in the theater within the theater in Hamlet. You know, how can we understand the function of this redoubling of fiction in the emergence of truth?
Yeah, thank you for this question. Perhaps I will take time to respond to it, and I will go back to something that I said before in relationship to disavowal. Namely, one could say that there are two ways of in which one can see why the real, the truth as related to the real, cannot be said in any immediate, direct way. So these are two opposite ways which we can see. One is fetishism, the other is fiction, and they have nothing in common. So again, to come to this Slavoj's example of hamster, the point there is precisely that there is no way to simply directly, immediately contemplate things as they are, I don't know, in the real. So disavowal fetishism precisely works by way of kind of, we could say, blinding ourselves for this dimension of the real, or just kind of derealizing it. And fiction, on the other hand, is the opposite of this, because it finds a way of articulating, formulating, ascribing into the reality itself the real on which this reality is based, or on the exclusion of which this reality is based. So fiction in this sense has nothing to do with just inventing things that are not there. It is very much in touch with the real, let's say. It is about rendering, saying a certain real precisely in a way that inscribes it into reality, that we can relate to it, that we can understand it. And the example, as I think Bernardo mentioned, that Lacan uses this is the play within the play in Hamlet, this mousetrap in Hamlet. And just think of how this is structured. We could have a situation where the ghost reveals this truth to Hamlet, and then Hamlet just declares it to everybody. Okay, I know this, nobody saw it, but I know, I was told, this is what happened. This would be one way. So I think you can see how this wouldn't work. It would just be, okay, he could have been declared a lunatic or whatever. Some people would believe, some not, but it wouldn't really shatter this reality, which is in fact based on this crime, which is excluded in the same way than it does with this other means when we have something appearing on the stage itself, kind of rendering and shattering, first of all, the culprit, the king, and the kingdom itself also through it. So it's just to say that it is this fiction within fiction, not simply fiction, but here literally play within the play, which is much more efficient in spelling, not only in spelling out the truth about what happened, but also in doing this in an effective way, in an efficient way that makes a difference in the context of the kingdom of this whatever. And I think this is also the case very often, for instance, and I think Slavoj also uses these examples. If you look at contemporary Hollywood or whatever, Netflix, HBO, and so on production, how if we look at shows that are really critical, let's say, that spell out a certain real about social circumstances, usually these are not the shows that directly show the misery of this or that, but more like some crime stories, some stories which are not directly about social injustice, but through which this dimension of social injustice, of horror, comes across in a much more palpable and efficient way. Yeah, so there is this way in which fiction works precisely as not as kind of indirectness in the sense of just hinting at something, but actually articulating it in a broader context, in a concrete way, which is much more, which speaks to us much more than just just like saying it would do. So there is real that is attached, that can be attached to doing fiction, and this I think it's really important. But if you think that in order to get to the real, you just need to strip down every other thing, then you lose it in this same gesture. So the real or the truth always come dressed up in this or that way, not because we cannot bear to see it like this, but because it in itself also lacks this imaginary dimension. It is not something that you can simply, there is truth, it's not something that you can directly see. You kind of experience it, feel it, even appreciate it, understand it precisely through a network of texture, of concrete texture, which articulates it. Yeah, so I don't know, this is how I understand this claim, which is again not that truth is just a fiction in the sense, you know, like sometimes Nietzschean criticism of truth. This is something very different from what Lacan is saying. It is there is something about truth precisely because it kind of touches the real that needs this kind of non-immediate way of saying it, to saying it in the most direct way possible. So this is the paradox. In order to really say it as it is, you often need to find an artifice that manages to do so. And of course, I mean, just to add one, if there are those there interested more in clinic and psychoanalysis, there is also this famous construction in analysis, which is a notion which actually constructs something that perhaps never happened, but which is precisely the way in which, let's say, the real of this or that subjectivity is best rendered. It's like really nailing it as the by way of constructing something.
Yeah. Well, okay, thanks a lot, Alenka.
Yeah, I don't know. I hope this is makes any
a lot of sense.
Yeah. Do you have any sub questions or whatever? You just yeah.
I have another question here. It's about if you see a relationship between this disavowal and the emergence of the so-called neo-fascism today.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I definitely do. And perhaps it's not the obvious relationship in the sense that neo-fascism is about disavowal. My diagnosis is rather that the rise of so-called neo-fascism is a kind of a response to what takes place as a mainstream politics of disavowal. So I know I make this analysis of some movies and of some other things where I try to show precisely how, okay, if we relate neo-fascism also to this movement of direct denial, which is different from disavowal, like denial of climate change, denial of whatever things that are, and then on the, like, the center right or mainstream, you have this business as usual modality, which is really predicated on disavowal of real social contradictions. So through this mainstream social disavowal, these contradictions not only continue to exist, the social contradictions, social difference, and so on, but even augment, become bigger and bigger and bigger. And neo-fascism, this kind of movements, come in and cash precisely on this augmentation of social contradictions and crises and so on. They are so effectively disavowed, let's say, by the decades and decades of that more, let's say, so-called democratic mainstream politics. Because you can see that these neo-fascist movements, or sometimes they're simply called populist movement, they are not simply completely wrong in the way they assess the social space, in the sense that they see that there are problems, social problems, contradictions. So, but then what they propose in relationship to these crises and problems, which are certainly real, is precisely this standard neo-fascist, fascist, whatever recipe of finding one culprit which embodies these contradictions and proposes the story that if we eliminate this foreign body, this culprit, the society will grow back into some kind of peaceful, harmonic, organic state. And there can be many culprits. It's not necessarily one. This depends on places, I mean, on different countries and so on. But you can get, very often it's also a mixture of these culprits. You know, so then you get this kind of strange mix. You have migrants or simply foreigners, foreign workers, whatever, which are stealing our substance, or you have LGBT, whatever movement, which are supposedly eroding our substance, or you have, okay, anti-Semitism was the classic fascist idiom there, like Jews are doing this and so on. And obviously these are, as we can see from history and from immediate experience, not solutions at all, but they do respond to a certain social real, and precisely they do respond to the this kind of small, whatever, neoliberal, liberal disavowal of this real, which just pretends that we can still go on and on and on with whatever. But of course, if we would try to analyze more specifically this movement, I'm not saying that there is no dimension of disavowal in this, let's say, neo-fascist movements themselves. But like socially, globally, I would say that this is that they have a different problem, which is more directly related to both denial and direct repression than this kind of more supposedly rational mainstream politics.
Okay. Thanks. Now we want to touch another topic. Is a while ago we see this great Slovenian film, Class Enemy.
Okay. Yeah, I saw it quite some time ago, but yeah, I remember it, of course.
Yeah. Do you see a problem of philosophical interest in education? Do you have any reading in that sense?
Yeah, I mean, quite obviously, education has always been one of, as Althusser put it, ideological state apparatuses. I mean, this is the kind of classic Marxist take, if you want, on the education in terms of institutional education. So the question of how certain ideological and class differences are precisely being reproduced through these different systems, including the systems of education. And of course, you have different systems of education in different countries. This is also important. But at the same time, reproduction of the relationship of power relationship and so on through the system of education is obviously something very important to consider also critically. Then you also have this other Freudian idea when he talks about impossible professions. Now he names 3 impossible professions, namely mastery in the sense of being master, educating, and analysis. So, and there is a hint there that in this impossibility that is immanent to all 3 is also a potential point of their emancipatory power. This is how I would read it. So education as one of these is caught precisely in between this, let's say, simple ideal even of the Aufklärung, like we need to educate as many people as possible, because if reason prevails, if knowledge prevails, all our troubles, or most of them also social, will kind of, if not disappear, become much smaller. So this is the kind of project of enlightenment. On the other hand, you have this critical view, also more Foucauldian or Althusserian, where this is simply ideology reproducing itself and producing and sustaining or upholding the oppression, the power already in place. So, and I think that psychoanalysis here has a slightly view that differs a little bit from both of these perspectives, because precisely it introduces this idea of knowledge as intrinsically split in itself, not a kind of homogeneous thing, substance that you simply appropriate, but as something in itself split and contradictory. And of course, I'm talking here about the question of the unconscious knowledge. Not unconscious for Freud and Lacan is about knowledge. This is something the unconscious knows. It's not simply something. So there is a split in knowledge if you take this psychoanalytic take on the question of knowledge. And this split then affects both these two absolute. You get something where knowledge is neither simply this kind of fully consistent repressive apparatus that only reproduces relations of power without any escape, and there is a crack in this on this side, and on the other side there is also this crack in this ideal of knowledge that by itself will emancipate and liberate us of all dark forces, whatever. And I think this is precisely why for Freud, education was one of the impossible professions, because it has this crack inscribed within the very notion of knowledge, but at the same time, this crack itself is a possible side, a possible scene of something like freedom entering the space, something happening there. But I would say that in order to pursue this possibly emancipatory dimension of knowledge, we have to precisely distinguish it from this idea of knowledge as accumulation of information. And instead of this, to really enforce this other aspect, which is precisely related to this crack in knowledge, which is the aspect of thinking, of truth, of taking time to think through things and not simply accumulating points and knowledge in this sense. Because in order to really be able to think about things, it is not enough simply to know them in the sense of having as much as information as possible, which is also important, but there is something more. You need to see, to put it in Hegelian terms, precisely these inner antagonisms, contradictions, which drive this knowledge, which drive these ideas. So this is crucial, I think. I'm not sure if this answers this education question, but at least
yes.
like roughly.
Yes. Yes, it's very interesting. Thanks for that. And well, we are done with our questions, so maybe we have some minutes in order to take a question of the audience. I think we have at least two.
Okay.
Now, Emilio will formulate a question.
Thank you, Alenka. Yeah, I'm interested regarding the concept of desire and the idea of fiction, or double fiction. And, I'm interested in the ways in which these desire and fictions are produced. Is there a possibility of identifying mechanisms through which desire and fictions are produced? And do you think that the law could be seen as one of them? I'm asking this because I'm a lawyer. I am a law professor, and I'm interested in the relationship between the law and the production of desire and ideas such as fiction.
Okay, so if I understand your question about law, it is about law in this more specific, let's say, legislative sense, not necessarily in this kind of more emphatic psychoanalytic sense of the law.
No. Absolutely. I'm talking about the law as
the
right,
law in the like right. Yeah. So, of course, I mean, there is a whole lineage, a whole genealogy of the dialectics of desire, which Lacan conjugates precisely with the law, and this springs already from the Bible. I'm specifically referring to St. Paul's letter to the Romans. I think it's from there, where he says there would be no desire if the law did not say do not desire other people's women and so on. There is this kind of direct lineage saying that actually the law and desire emerge at the same time, and that desire emerges as precisely the other side of the law, or that what the law creates by forbidding it. But at the same time, I think that Lacanian concept of desire is much wider than simply this kind of mechanism, to use your term, automatism. Okay, you forbid it and for sure somebody will want it. That there is, this exists, this kind of automatism of desire as created by law itself when prohibited something, but this does not exhaust the dimension of desire. And in this broader sense, desire for Lacan is related not simply or just to the question of law, but to the very, very simple fact that we are human beings, speaking beings, who articulate our also desires, needs, whatever, in speech, through speech. And here the genealogy is slightly different and more interesting. One example would be to say, I'm even as an infant, I don't know, I demand food, which is to say I articulate my need for food in language, but then I also address this demand, this desire to the other, to someone who responds in one way or another. And here it is already, you can say, I demand food, I ask for food, but I also demand that the other gives me this food as an act of love. There is a dimension of love also that can enter there. And in a way, desire is precisely what you get if you subtract the first from the other. That is to say, desire is about this non-coincidence, non-identity of these different realms that are opened by the fact that we speak, that we relate to others, and that we enter all kinds of relations with them. And here desire becomes more unpredictable because its cause, its object cause, it precisely, as I said earlier on, it is not food, it is not love, but it is precisely something that the nothing that remains if I subtract one from the other. It is precisely this. It is not it. There is this crack that is this. There is the very object of desire. So I don't know if this kind of. So there is surely there is a mechanism. There is a way of kind of explaining certain way in which desire works, but this is not something that is meant to simply explain the desire away or point to its ultimate object of because precisely the whole point of desire is that this structure itself is such that it cannot get a correlative object. Yeah, so I don't know if this is answers your question. Anyway, I mean, I didn't even start talking about fiction, which is a slightly different idea, but just one more perhaps remark concerning the question of the law. Because one way in which, and this is not law in a juridical sense, but more law in a kind of sense of physics or something like this, Lacan has this idea, that the question of the cause, can it be explained? Causality, perhaps not so much the law of causality, the law as in the law of causality. He says there are only causes of things which do not work. Yeah, precisely, and this is why. I mean, the idea here is that this is how psychoanalysis came to be. You only ask about causes when there is something interrupts the smooth chain of causes and effects. So what is this? What happened? You ask the question of the cause in this moment. But yes, to go back to the original question, so the juridical, of course, desires, fictions, and law, which is a certain kind of fiction in a good way. I mean, I'm not saying law is fiction, just it is precisely something that structures, again, certain relationships in a way which are itself antagonistic, in a way which kind of tries to deal with them. So not that law is a fiction in the sense of that it is truth, but this is another way of constructing something that maps our reality in a certain way.
Can I make a follow-up question?
Yes, yes, if
it depends on your law. Okay.
Well, yes, I want to come back to the thing of law. Yes, of course, I didn't mean the law just as a prohibition, right? No, actually, what we see today in law acting as a vehicle or an element of desire and fiction at the same time, is that law allows to restructure or structure reality in a certain way, and actually seems to be capable of producing certain desires. For example, when you look at gay movements in the West, right? I mean, you look at their political platforms in the 60s and the 70s, and you see immediately that they criticized marriage as a backward, exclusionary, and oppressive institution that needed to be abolished, and etc., etc. And nevertheless, in 80s, 90s, and 2000s, they got obsessed with the law, and actually they produce a real desire for marriage. It's kind of strange, especially thinking that many of the sociological literature shows that actually gay marriage in many societies has reproduce heterosexual dynamics within gay couples rather than emancipating them. So I'm looking at how law produces desire for status, for privileges, for not with prohibitions, but actually with positive norms like human rights, for example. Thank you.
Okay, I get your question better now. Thanks. Okay, this is I guess very complicated issue also in terms of what comes first, if this what actually was human rights, and if I get you right, you suggest that it was the very notion of human rights that gave rise to the desire for marriage among gays. This is a little bit what you're saying. Can I go on, or will you translate?
No, I'm just saying that it helps to
yeah. No, but definitely one point which I very much agree with you, and what I see as a really interesting difference between the way sexuality, not only gay movement and so, but sexuality as such was thought about in, let's say, 60s, and the way it is thought about now in these recent movements is almost diametrically opposed. What I think was the case in the 60s, to put it in very simple ways, was the idea that sexuality needs to be liberated from social norms, from the symbolic as such, which was thought of as something oppressive. Law, whatever, is something that we have to transgress this. We don't want symbolic recognition. We want to transgress it because the symbolic itself is bad or enslaving. And what you see now very often in this last wave of movements is that all these sexual issues tend to demand to be emancipated, not from the symbolic, but through the symbolic, by the symbolic. And you can see this not only in these demands for marriage or not, but also in the way how one insists on coming up with names, particular symbolic names for all kind of different, let's say, social, sexual orientations. This urge to have a symbolic name, identity related to your sexuality and so on. And I think this is really interesting. I mean, I've written on it and I don't have the time to now repeat all this, but I think again here, psychoanalysis has a kind of take on this opposition which undermines this very opposition, like symbolic, is it through the symbolic or through from the, which is another discussion. I mean, continuation of this discussion. So to conclude, I would just say that this certainly exists, the way in which this notion of rights and so on also affect our desires. But at the same time, I would absolutely emphasize also that human rights, particularly, are a very important notion, and that we should not simply see this as a kind of, I mean, I think in kind of concrete situations, I mean, the fact that people can marry, can have kids, we are talking about concrete destinies which very much depend on this. But so that in a way, I would say that both the first thing of heroically transgressing the symbolic, the law, refusal, and this last turning to the law, they are both generated symbolically, not only this one that is based on human rights, but I think that these are all the ways in which we seek to posit ourselves vis-a-vis the law in so, but there is a dialectics in this, and it's not, and this would be my crucial point, it is not automatic. Whatever we think, it is, we can detect a certain tendencies, a certain prevalences, but it is not simply direct or automatic. Yeah, I hope.
Okay, thank you, Alenka. And I don't know if, how are you with the time? Maybe we have one more question. Maybe you can do a little remarks, you know, and the final question is made of Axel Fuentes is there. His question is about the political treatment of this perversion on fascism, and kind of it says the left worldwide says no to the fascism, no to the you have to say no. You don't have to argue with fascism. You have to confront it. No, so I think Axel's question is pointing to what do we do? It's like
yes, again, it's the $1 million question, and I'm not simply joking. I really think that obviously this is the problem. I think roughly we all know what we would need to do, but the real question is how to do it, and what are socially effective ways of doing something. So here I'm more and more inclined to say that that one should really work out of a certain concrete context. And I'm not saying simply just local context, but also context of certain kinds of questions and so on. So work out from this context instead of simply entering these debates and looking for solutions with some kind of preemptive answers, pre-established answers, some kind of, and this is what I sometimes think the left does too much. That there is, okay, but if we say this, then this is not really leftist. This really depends on concrete circumstances, on concrete questions. What I'm saying is that it is not, you don't know a priori what to do, because you have to work with the material, with the what emerges in a certain social conflict, in a certain country or several countries and so on, and work up something from there. Look for answers, I mean, and responses from these concrete situations. So I know this is still a kind of abstract recipe, but I think it's much better than just saying, okay, we need social justice. Of course, we need social justice. We need this or that. But it is, one needs to invent ways in which work with concrete issues, which people definitely have. But also more generally, I think one really needs to look for things that link and relate these different kinds of struggle, which often see themselves as mutually exclusive, but one would need to find a way of not really uniting them, but linking them at precise point where they all have this possibly emancipatory hint in them, or this kind of a dimension in them. Yeah, and then perhaps to really look for the points of this, I use this Hegelian term, concrete universality, which is never simply universality. It's not, the way I see it, it's not some kind of a general sphere that covers as large as territory as possible, but it's something very concrete that has the power to extend in all these kind of directions and different struggles. And just to finish with one example, which I think also Slavo uses, you know, precisely the difference. What is concrete universality? This is the difference between saying in a specific American context, Black Lives Matter, and saying in this same context, all lives matter. You can feel how it is precisely by naming the one life that is, by definition, foreclosed or excluded, that here you hit the universal. Not by saying, yeah, of course, all lives matter. This is not the universal that has any kind of political impetus in it. So if you want for all to matter, you need to find precisely one point which is excluded from this all in order to, this is the only kind of general strategy, but I don't have any kind of magic solution. I think it's this word is really some kind of falling into some very, very, very obscure time.
Well, we don't want to abuse of your time. Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure to have you here with us. Well, maybe we can give you an applause. No,
no, thank you. I really enjoyed this discussion. I hope, yeah, at least something useful came across. But we have to keep struggling, I guess.
Sí, claro. Sí. Bueno, muchas gracias. Thank you so much. Muchas gracias a los que vinieron hoy día a la presentación. Bueno, espero que nos veamos la próxima. Hope you see you in